Greetings, Doctor Wolfula here to present a very important special audio presentation that your ears cannot dare unlisten to. Does that make sense? Oh, it doesn't matter. Listen to this.
Welcome to someone's favorite movie. I'm coming to you from the Pod Shack outside beautiful Bay City, Michigan. My name is Randy, and with me is the man they call Tomko. What's up, sir? How you doing today?
I'm doing good, but, I have to say that you are sounding absolutely glorious on this new connection, sir.
See, I mean, we had all sorts of technical difficulties, and Lord forbid, I put our dear, dear listeners through that. Their ears are too precious to me, so I was like, hey, you know what?
They deserve it.
They deserve it. For the sanity of all, I will upgrade this internet connection so everyone is clear as a goddamned bell, you know?
Wonderful.
So if you...
Welcome to the future, sir.
If you write in and say that you hate our audio quality, I will personally show up to your door and throat punch you. All right? That's what you get.
I'm just picturing you with a checklist and, a frequent flyer log.
I mean, somebody's got to do it.
Someone.
Might as well be me. Today, Tomko, we are covering probably one of the most bizarre love stories you'll ever see. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think that is very fair to say. Yes, sir.
This is a unique flower. It's a love story about a young man who commits suicide after a breakup with his girlfriend, who finds himself stuck in some strange purgatory where only other people who have committed suicide are living. The only thing stopping him from committing suicide again in the afterlife, LOL, is the fear that he'd end up in an even bigger shithole. This is where we find ourselves. Today we're talking about Wristcutters, a love story. I know when we interviewed the illustrious Doctor Wolfula a few months back, he cited this as one of his favorite movies that he wished more people knew about.
I can see why. I mean, this is a movie where I was very familiar with the title. I thought I knew the book that it was based on, but I was talking on my ass, apparently. And I don't know. I mean, it just goes to show you that you don't need a huge budget and A-list actors to make a good movie. All you need is a good story.
Yeah, absolutely. You would recognize most of the folks in this cast, and you could probably, without even knowing what year this came out, you could probably pinpoint exactly the time frame in which it was released. Because Shannyn Sossamon, for example, was in a ton of things between 2001 and 2006, and then for whatever reason went away for a good long while. So you can really pinpoint that, I think.
Yeah. Well, that and the lead actor, Patrick Fugit, or however or like Nougat. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name.
Patrick Fugit.
He looks just a couple years removed from his gig on Rolling Stone magazine. So again, it's a pretty good indicator of when this movie came out.
He's referring to the movie Almost Famous.
Yes. He's not quite famous, but he's almost there.
He's almost there. That Kate Hudson was a revelation in that movie, huh?
Yeah, speaking of, I mean, I know that we talked about, what was it, the Skeleton Key, but what the hell ever happened to her? She was supposed to be a huge deal.
Oh, you know what she's doing these days? She has a podcast with her brother called Sibling Revelry, I believe. And she has a bunch of famous people on with their siblings or family members and just has conversations about their dynamics and stuff. And boy, oh boy, if you didn't know it, let me just tell you that Kate Hudson is delightful.
Well, I'm glad to see that, there are some things in Hollywood that aren't total lies then, I guess.
Yeah, she hosts it with her brother, Oliver Hudson, who was also an actor, not nearly as famous as Kate Hudson, but he was in some things.
Well, yeah. You can't be an actor unless you're in some things.
Okay. You going to sharpshoot me all night there? Oh, you got your sniper rifle out and you got Got it fully loaded with sarcasm sniper bullets. My God.
But yes, back to the people who cut their wrists. This was a movie that I walked into completely blind after Doc's recommendation. I didn't bother to watch a trailer, and I'm kind of glad because how do you sell this movie? A romantic comedy about suicides doesn't really scream, watch this film.
Yeah, it's very, very odd. I mean, you commit suicide, get stuck in purgatory, and you're just as miserable until you find somebody who you want to get with. But she claims that she's there by mistake. She didn't actually commit suicide. And in the meantime, he befriends a rock star who killed himself via electrocution on stage after pouring a beer on his electric guitar at a concert. And
Pretty fucking metal.
Yeah, right? And by the way, that rock star, his whole family is in this place with him. He lives with his mom and dad and brother because his entire family has committed suicide at various different points too.
Now, I'm going to, say that I love my family. They're great. But I'm pretty sure if I had to spend eternity with them, that wouldn't be purgatory. We'd be in full-on hell. I think I, too, would have to take a road trip with the stranger.
I mean, you got to get away however you can. By the way, this rock star, he also has a black hole under the passenger seat of his car, in case you were worried it wasn't weird enough for you.
Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of just bizarre things in this movie, but for whatever reason, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about them or wondering about the logics of it. It's one of those movies where you just automatically go with it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. My main question to you, Mr. Tomko, sir, you're an expert on all sorts of things, including that of public opinion. I mean, do you think this movie could be made today without all sorts of commotion? Because, I mean, I watched the movie Dead Man on Campus during lockdown last year. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard, it's one of those ones where I've heard the name.
Yeah, and I was watching it because it's one of those I was always curious about, and I didn't realize how awful it was until I actually watched it. And it's about Zach from Saved by the Bell and his doofus friend. They're at college, and all they do is party, of course, and their grades slip, and they're in danger of being expelled. But by some quirky bylaw in the college rule book, if somebody on campus commits suicide, then nobody is allowed to be failed in that semester due to emotional distress. So they go about finding the most depressed people on campus and try to coax them into committing suicide so they get passing grades. This is a real movie that got made.
This came out, early 2000s, late 90s?
Late 90s, I think 98, 99, somewhere in there.
Okay, yeah. It was a different world back then. I could see where that movie fit into it. It just wouldn't have a place today, I don't think.
I know. This movie is a lot tamer by comparison.
Yeah, I'd say the difference between this movie and what you described to me is that there's no real malice in this movie, whereas that movie just sounds like nothing but.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's weird to say, but I think Wristcutters, a love story, is kind of sweet a little bit.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's a nice little romantic movie. It just goes out of its way to be weird, but not so weird that it's not accessible.
As you mentioned before, it's based on a short story called Neller's Happy Campers by Israeli writer Etgar Keret. I believe it or not, I'm actually familiar with him back in my college days when I read all sorts of alternative fiction. I had picked up one of his collections of short stories called The Nimrod Flip Out, and it's really good. The short story in question isn't in that collection, but he's a writer who specializes in magic realism, which, if you don't know, basically It's a fiction that has a sort of magical bent to it.
I think I can wrap my head around that description. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You toned down real quick after I called you out about it. I appreciate that. Later still, it was adapted in a graphic novel form under the title Pizzeria Kamikaze, which is where Zaya, and that's where he works in the afterlife. This movie definitely hooks you from the very beginning. There's a real striking beginning to it. You got Tom Waits' song Dead and Lonely playing over the opening credits, which I know just about appeals to everything that you're about, Mr. Tomko.
As soon as I heard this, I was in.
I knew you would be. Then we have a slow reveal of a young man's morning routine. It's Patrick Fugit, or Patrick Fugit is how I decide his name should be pronounced. And he's like, la-di-da-di-da, just another day. And then suddenly the man falls to the ground and the camera pans out to reveal bloody razor blades sitting on a sink filled with blood. And you're like, oh my God, we're in for something.
Now, not to interrupt and, pee on your parade, but I didn't get the impression that this was his daily routine at all. I got the impression that he was in the middle of this massive funk because the state of his apartment was just completely trashed. It was filled with all kinds of garbage that had to be cleared out, and he wanted to get it spotless. And he worked for what seemed to be on hours to get it in pristine condition before opening up a vein. And the punchline is, right as he is slipping off his mortar coil, he looks in the corner and there's a huge dust ball that he forgot.
Yeah. And that was his final vision.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, I see what kind of movie we're in for. It's going to be warped, but not too messed up.
Yeah, we find out that he killed himself because of a breakup with his beloved girlfriend. And in voiceover, he says, I think she cried at my funeral. I don't mean to brag about it or anything.
Which makes me wonder how close these guys actually were in real life.
Yeah, because the words, I think, and bragging about the fact that she may have cried at his funeral, might not have been a stellar relationship.
Probably not. But it's like that, with everybody when they have a breakup, you always romanticize the past. No matter how shitty it was always good because you can't have it anymore.
The art of the voiceover, Tomko, do you love it or not? It was a thing that really seemed to take hold in the 90s and definitely 2000s. Some people love it. Some despise it and dub it as lazy.
I think it's like any other tool in a filmmaker's wordshed. It can be used and it can be abused.
Yeah. I think it works best when it's like consistently throughout the movie. There's some movies where like it'll be in the beginning of the movie and then you'll never hear it again. And in those instances, I feel like it is lazy. Like you couldn't think of a better way to establish exposition.
No, I think that's fair. And I'll be honest with you. In this movie, it's kind of forgettable.
Yeah.
It's like, I've seen this movie a couple times now, and when I sat down to watch it again last night, I completely did not remember that there was any kind of voiceover.
This might be one of the cases where it's definitely used in the beginning, and I think it's used a little bit in the end, but in the middle parts, I don't think it is so much.
No. I think it's not a bad way to establish exactly what kind of world this story is set in, but it didn't. Yeah, they could have done a couple things to show as opposed to tell, but I'm not going to, strike any points from the movie because of the way that they did it.
Yeah. The real plot of the movie takes hold when good old Zaya runs into an old acquaintance of his who has also committed suicide. And he finds out that his beloved girlfriend committed suicide a few months after he did. And so now he goes on a wild road trip to find and reunite with his loved ex-girlfriend. So it's kind of a romantic story, also a road trip movie. It's a lot of things all at once.
It is. I mean, there's not a lot of big set pieces in this movie. It's one of those films where it's just a bunch of talking heads kind of describing their situation, describing who they are, and that's about it, But it's nowhere near as boring as I make it sound, because the characters I found to be really interesting. I thought it was really funny how when you're in this world, the scars and remnants of your suicide are still visible. It's like Zaya. He has a couple of scars on his wrists, and he is just ghostly pale from the loss of blood. You have other characters that have visible bullet wounds in their head.
Yeah, Nick Offerman plays a purgatory cop who had killed himself, shot himself in the head. Well, he put a shotgun in his mouth, and you see him take off his hat at one point, and he's got a clear, cartoonish, exit wound out of his head.
And I'm glad you used the word cartoonish, because even though this is a macabre subject matter, there's nothing in here that's gruesome.
No, I mean, even the fact that Zaya remarks that he would consider killing himself again in the afterlife is kind of hilarious.
Yes. And I just love the fact that there are so many little touches in this world where you can tell that, yeah, it's not awful, but it's not great. It's like his Zaya's roommate that he got assigned with is upset because he insists on peeing standing up. Just little things.
Right.
He can't quite figure out how to use the pizza slicer and ends up just dropping everything. It's just, the headlights on, is it Eugene? Was that his name?
Yeah, Eugene plays the rock star.
Yeah, the headlights don't work. The car has bald tires. None of the, accessories work, but it'll still drive. Just little things like that I thought were really kind of cute.
I know I mentioned it before, but I actually love the idea of the Deus Ex Machina underneath his passenger seat. This black hole, or he calls it a Bermuda Triangle too. He's like, anything that falls in, it's lost forever.
I mean, just one of those things that it's not life-shattering, but God, it sucks.
Right. Yeah. So they go on a road trip to find Zaya's ex-girlfriend, and on their way they pick up a hitchhiker named Mikal, played by Shannyn Sossamon, and she's the one who insists that she's here by mistake, and she wants to find the people in charge so that she can live again.
I was wondering what her backstory was, and was wondering if they were going to show exactly what happened, because that's something that we didn't even talk about. When they're talking about a person's actual mortal death, they always flash back to what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are kind of sad. Some of them are just downright hilarious. And I kept wondering what actually happened. And I'm glad that they explained that it was an accidental overdose. They didn't glorify it. They didn't make it seem particularly tragic. It was one of those things in life that just happens.
Yeah. And I mean, you can have theories all you want about, well, that's a slow suicide or whatever. And it's kind of a point. She didn't mean to do it. She just meant to have a good time, and it kind of happened.
Well, yeah, and I was wondering where they were going to go with it, because at what point do you cut it off? Yes, it's a slow suicide, but so is McDonald's.
Good point, yeah.
If I, have an artery explode, do I find myself in this world where I have like a tiny little netbook to podcast on, and I'm stuck using the microphone from my old rock band set?
Right, and I would be stuck with my old internet trying desperately to record a Texas Chainsaw Massacre retrospective and having you cut out every 3 seconds. So, you know?
Eh.
That would be hell.
So eventually, they are driving at night, which they aren't supposed to do because the headlights just don't work. And McCall is kind of flipping around the switches, and lo and behold, the headlights all of a sudden start working. And it's just in time that they flash because out of nowhere is a man just sleeping in the road. And it's not just any man, it's the great Tom Waits.
It is the great Tom Waits. He plays the Neller of the Neller's Happy Campers, of which this movie is based on. And god damn it, Tom Waits needed to be and still needs to be in more movies.
Yeah, I can't think of I mean, he's not a great actor. I mean, clearly he shouldn't give up his day job, but he hasn't done a bad role that I've seen.
No, he's just got a presence about him.
He does. I mean, if I could level any criticism, it's that he's like the good Adam Sandler in that he tends to play the same role over and over again, but it just happens to be really good. And unlike Adam Sandler, he's actually entertaining.
Ooh, shots fired.
Shots fired.
He's taking his aim at someone else now, and I feel relieved. Tom Waits is awesome in this movie, I think. Just by being Tom Waits, he doesn't. He just kind of prances about and delivers his lines in his trademark gravelly voice, and he's got kind of a whimsical, mischievous quality about him, which I think is not too far removed from the actual man himself.
No, this is, I mean, he's known for his deadpan humor, and it is on full display in this film.
If you need any more reference to that, look up the clip that was going around years ago about how did Heath Ledger's Joker, was Heath Ledger's interpretation of the Joker inspired by Tom Waits? And it's a video where he appears on some English talk show, and he's very out of it, or maybe he's just playing like he's out of it. And sure enough, certainly does sound like the way that Heath Ledger models his voice in the Dark Knight movie.
Well, it's not just the voice, it's the body language, it's the way that he kind of interacts with the talk show host. It's very, very, very similar.
Yeah, I think there could be an argument to be made about that.
So Neller has this, wouldn't even call it a camp. It's more of a commune.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And not only is it a commune where, you have more quirky people, but it's the home of the useless miracle.
Yeah.
It's nothing that is going to be, it's not going to change your life. It's just going to be one of those things where you kind of tilt your head like a dog that's been shown a card trick and you go, huh. There's a guy who's randomly sitting 3 feet in the air. All of a sudden my headlights work. It's just a completely meaningless miracle.
Yeah. They pal around with Neller, and Zaya and Mikhail kind of have a moment where they kiss and fall asleep on a beach, a romantic beach, which in the next morning, Neller yells at him for because they've fallen asleep on a beach filled with hypodermic needles and used condoms. I mean, what else would you expect from purgatory, right?
He had a great line. This is where IV users and prostitutes would congregate. It was too hideous for even them to keep coming here. Life is going by just fine in Neller's happy camp. We forgot to mention Freddy. Freddy is Neller's dog that he cannot find. Which makes me wonder, did the dog commit suicide?
That's a good point. Like, did the dog run headlong into traffic? Would that count?
Did he get into trash that he wasn't supposed to?
Oh, maybe so. Maybe he was told not to, or he did anyways, and that's his punishment.
Exactly.
That kind of makes me sad. That's even sadder than the ending of Old Yeller. Like, knowing a dog went to purgatory. Ugh.
Well, that's why you got to keep the M&Ms away from Freddy.
Don't feed your dogs M&Ms or Doritos, would you?
No. What's wrong with you people?
Yeah, don't feed yourselves M&Ms or Doritos for that matter.
Well, one of the campers who, honestly, he felt like he was a character that came out of nowhere, burst into the scene saying he found Freddy. The Messiah has him on the other side of the woods. And so Tom Waits asks him, okay, could you help us find this place? He's like, yeah, sure. We'll be there, in just a couple hours. No problem. Well, 2 days later, they're still walking. And eventually they come to another compound, except this one looks like something, it doesn't look like he's, living in some bad digs. It is filled with thousands of people who are waiting for the Messiah's next show. And I can never remember this actor's name. Is it Will Arnett?
It's definitely Will Arnett.
Yes, okay.
From Arrested Development. He's the voice of Batman in the Lego Batman movie. And he's got a pretty great podcast with Jason Bateman and Sean Hayes called Smartless, which is one of my favorites. So,
well, turns out that Will Arnett plays this Messiah whose name is King.
Yeah, he calls himself the Messiah King.
Turns out that he was the head of a death cult on Earth, and he convinced his followers that they were all trapped in the world of the living, and the only way to escape was to shed your soul. And he ended up committing suicide, and it didn't quite work.
No, it didn't quite work. He ends up in the afterlife here, into purgatory here. And by the way, we see a flashback as to how Zaya's girlfriend committed suicide.
Yes, because she is pretty much the lieutenant of Messiah. She's kind of like the Allison Mack of the purgatory world.
Right. Absolutely. That's exactly what she is.
It's yeah. Well, she didn't commit suicide, it turns out, because she was devastated with grief over Zaya's death. No, she was a member of this death cult. She hooked up with the group after the suicide. Well, I should say Zaya's suicide. And when Messiah shed his mortal coil, she decided to follow suit. She went up to a roof and decided to go flying.
And she's not Peter Pan, so it didn't work out well for her.
Not well at all.
No. So here she is, and she's with her Messiah King again, and he holds this very public party almost, where he's going to commit a suicide again in the afterlife. That's the one thing that really cracks me up. Like, all these people in purgatory can still get drunk and they still worry about like death and stuff when they're already dead. It's kind of funny.
And as someone who spent a long time smoking cigarettes, I thought it was kind of interesting that they didn't have any jokes about cigarettes, because there are so many things that can go wrong while you're trying to smoke. It'll break. It will. I used to call it sidetracking, where it would just like burn half a side of the cigarette. You accidentally light the wrong end of it. I'm really surprised that they didn't have any kind of joke about those situations.
Sidetracking? I've never heard of this before.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often, but it will like just burn on one side. So you'll have this huge cherry on one side, and then you'll have unburned tobacco on the other side.
Well, I'm glad you're no longer a savage. You just sit there and vape your ass off.
Yes, I've upgraded to the douche chimney.
Yeah, you did. Here.
Yeah. So the whole point of Messiah gathering his flock, he is going to make a show of a second suicide. And somehow there's a little bit of separation between Micah and Zaya, where they can see each other, but they can't really talk. Neller comes up to Zaya and just says, well, why don't you just tell her that you love her? And you could tell that he doesn't really know exactly what to do because he does still have feelings for Desiree, his ex, but he's starting to remember why they broke up, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think he slowly realizes that, man, maybe it was all a big mistake,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is the rightly moral stance that the movie takes at the end. Like, he killed himself over this girl, but was it really that great? And was it actually worth it? And
Nah.
this and the sad thing is, he meets this person that he's in love with in purgatory, and she kind of disappears.
Well, she didn't just disappear. It turns out that Neller was working for the people that Micah was looking for, the quote unquote people in charge. He was an undercover agent who was running an illegal camp on government property.
Right.
He blew his cover at the second suicide of the Messiah. Uh, and next thing you know, you have these agents in white just parachuting in from out of nowhere. I didn't see any planes or anything, so I'm kind of led to believe that they were angels.
That's what I thought too. And instead of wings, they just got parachutes.
A lot more practical that way. You have any idea how hard it is to walk through a door when you're spreading, a huge set of wings?
Oh man. And then
It's the worst.
you get your angelic feathers all over the place, and you gotta sweep them up, and little kids are like, "Oh, look what I found!" I'm great.
Exactly.
You don't know where that's been. Also, I mean, I know what we're talking about in this movie, but it's still kind of grounded in some sort of reality. And I feel like if full out angels just dropped from the sky, it would kind of ruin that a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it absolutely would.
Somehow the
Yes.
paratroopers work in this reality a lot better than regular angels would.
I would agree. Yeah. Well, it turns out that Micah did get to talk with the people in charge and explain her situation, and it turns out that they agree. Yeah, she doesn't belong here. This wasn't an intentional suicide. And they not only allow her to leave, but to go back to the world of the living. And so once again, Zaya is left alone without a woman that he cares about. And it turns out that even Eugene finds a love interest. He falls for this deaf mute, throat singing, handsaw playing musician, and decides that he wants to move up to Alaska with her so he can meet her family and learn how to throat sing himself.
Yeah.
So, and I loved the train that they caught. Just a little rail car that they're going to have to ride in with some random driver all the way from what I'm assuming is California up the Pacific coast to Alaska.
Right. Yeah.
Nice little touch.
Yeah. This movie is full of nice little touches, quite
It is.
honestly.
It really, really is. And Zaya is left completely and utterly alone. He is listening to a tape that Eugene had in his pocket at the time of his death, which just so happened to be his own demo tape. What did you think of Eugene's music, by the way?
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. I did read it.
I think the quality of it fit this movie very well. It's not bad. It's not great, but it's listenable.
I guess he's based on a lead singer of a band, so his character is quite interesting, honestly.
Yeah, he just seems to be somebody who is willfully immature, especially when it comes to the way he handles his relationship with other people, particularly members of the opposite sex. He's very, very piggish. He has no problem putting his hands where they do not belong. But he had a really interesting arc where all he needed to do was find somebody else who had a very hard time communicating.
He's finally able to leave his family behind.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed to be kind of like a chain that held him down for his whole life. And he was finally able to shed that.
Mm-hmm.
So good for him.
So Zaya is driving back home to go back to work at the Kamikaze pizza joint, and he gets stopped at a railroad crossing, and Eugene's tape starts to get eaten, which, for those kids who don't remember, that was pretty common back in the days of cassettes where you'd be listening, all of a sudden it would start sounding warped, and next thing you know, you have all this magnetic tape just being vomited out of your radio.
Right.
So he ejects it, and while he's trying to get it set back into place, it slips underneath the passenger seat. And even though he knows it's lost, he still goes to look for it. Now, here's my question. He knew what was down there, even if he didn't exactly know what it looked like. And he knew that that tape was gone, but he still went anyway. Do you think that was another suicide?
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was.
I do too.
I think he was just lost, and I feel like he was just clinging to that tape because it was Eugene's tape, and he was singing on it, and that's the last thing he had.
Well, let's face it. That trip was probably consisted of the best days of his afterlife. And just when he got something that was really making him happy, poof, it's gone.
Yeah, he lost his ex-girlfriend once again. He lost his would-be girlfriend. He lost his best friend. He's alone again. So he says, oh, fuck it. Once that tape goes, that's the last thing he really had. So why not?
But turns out that you got to have a Tom Waits by your side. And luckily for Zaya, he had one. You cut to a scene in a warehouse belonging to the people in charge. And you see Neller going through Zaya's file, which I love how when he opens it up, it's filled with white feathers that fall to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Sneaks it into his jacket, and he's like, you know what? It's good to have people on high that you know. Zaya wakes up in the hospital. There's his parents. His wrists are wrapped, bandaged, and stitched back together. He looks over, and there's Micah. Credits.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of look at each other, and Zaya's in disbelief.
And they clearly recognize each other.
Yeah.
So there's no ambiguous questions of, was this just a thought that was going through his head as the synapses fired in his dying brain. No, it actually happened.
Yeah, they share a smile at the end, and that's it fades to black, and you're like, oh.
Yep, I got the impression that both of them are going to get their lives back on track. They're going to live. They got their happily ever after.
Yeah, I think that's what that was.
But I've got a question. Clearly, he didn't just go back to the real world. He went to the moment that he would have died. Would he be able to prevent the suicides of the king and his ex-girlfriend?
Oh. Yeah, well, that's a good point. I was going to say, well, how do you know he's not been there for months? Because initially, that's what I thought. But now when you say that, obviously his parents wouldn't be there being consulted by a doctor if he had been there for months.
Well, not only that, but you can still see some blood seeping through the white bandages. So clearly the suicide attempt just happened very recently.
Sure. And generally speaking, if a person ODs, they're not going to be in the hospital for that long.
No.
That's a good point. So effectively that erases, theoretically it might erase his ex-girlfriend's suicide as well. I didn't think about that. That's crazy. Wow. Does that mean Tom Waits is God?
Well, I could have told you that years ago.
Oh, man.
Seriously, listen to Nighthawks of the Diner. It's amazing.
I went on a big Tom Waits kick a few years ago, and I was like, oh my God, all these songs.
Yeah, and he's somehow still just a cult singer. He's not really well known.
Downtown Train is one of my favorite songs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So poetic and wonderful.
Yeah. I have both amazed and revolted people by playing them random Tom Waits songs.
Well, I feel like his voice is a very acquired taste. However, you could say that about Dylan and Springsteen as well, or any
Hmm.
number of other people, even Bowie, for crying out loud. Like,
Yeah,
it's all a matter of taste, really.
exactly.
None of those guys are traditionally great singers, but something about them makes them transcend above the rest.
Here, here.
Here, here. Let's drink a beer. Have no
So
fear.
what? So what are your thoughts on Wristcutters: A Love Story?
Well, I mean, initially, like you, I had heard of this movie. Really didn't know what it was about or anything about it, quite honestly, until Doctor Wolfula broke it down for us. I wasn't that excited to watch this. I thought it
Okay.
was going to be really, really bleak and dour, and it's not. Despite the subject matter, it's definitely a black comedy, but more comedy than anything, really. I mean, the dark comes from the fact that all these folks have killed themselves, and there's a lot of tragedy, but there's a lot of heart in this movie too.
I would agree. As far as myself, I was very pleasantly surprised with this movie. And again, I didn't come into it with any preconceived notions. I didn't think it was going to be dour. I didn't think it was going to be a bummer. Didn't think it was going to be all that great. But it had some interesting characters. And I know I already used this phrase before, but it was just weird enough to be interesting because there are some things where you can tell that they're cranking up the oddity levels to an ungodly, amount just to be quote unquote unique. And it's not enough to be unique, at least not for me. You got to have some kind of, a compelling character. They have to be relatable and you have to be interested in seeing the outcome of their story. And this movie had it in spades.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When it came out, it was, I mean, it was critically acclaimed. It was a nominee for the Grand Jury Prize in the 2006 Sundance Film Festival. It was nominated for Independent Spirit Awards for Best First Features and Best First Screenplays. So it did get some notice. It didn't blow up the box office at all, but it's become a cult classic since, and I can understand why.
Now, I did absolutely zero research on this movie. What about you, Randy?
Just the short little factoids that I've dropped here and there. I didn't do a whole lot of research this time. Usually, a lot of times you wouldn't believe the amount of notes I have, and I use like none of them. So
I, as a note taker, I can totally believe that.
I love I love researching. I guess I love the
Hmm.
act of research, so I find myself going hog wild, and I hope it informs what I'm talking about on this show. But
Oh,
this
absolutely.
Yeah, but this time I didn't find a whole lot, and I didn't really have time to dive too deeply. So,
But no, I'm just curious to see what other films this writer and director have done. And, it's just a matter of me opening up the IMDb app on my phone. But I'm definitely curious to see, with their follow up.
well, the director was a director from Croatia, Goran. Oh man, these names: Goran Duhic, maybe. I don't know. Uh, he hasn't had a very
Prolific?
yes, that's the word. Yeah, he hasn't had a very prolific career. Um, after Wristcutters, he was said to be involved with a murder mystery movie that was going to be called I Could Be You, and it just never happened. So as far as I know, this and like two minor films before that, short films, are all he's done, which is kind of a
That's a
shame.
damn shame.
Yeah. I mean, and there's reasons for that. There's various reasons how that could happen, but still a shame. I mean, when a movie is this kind of critically acclaimed and goes on to be a cult classic, you kind of wonder what happened. Like, where'd he go? What's he doing?
Well, I mean, especially in the day and age where Netflix is on the constant hunt for new content, you'd figure that they would give the guy, God, what, not even $2 million to do something original, and you'd figure that he would at least be able to make something interesting.
Yeah, this movie only had a budget of $1 million, and
Yeah.
it used the money well. So, I mean, that I guess that's one of the pros of this constant barrage of streaming services. No property or no career is ever truly dead. There's always a chance because everybody's on the hunt for content at all times. So,
Well, for God's sakes, Orson Welles has been dead for 35 years, and he just had a new movie come out last year. You
yeah,
know?
you're right. Yeah, that's wild.
All right. I'm trying to think of if there's anything else that we should say about it, other than definitely check it out. I know when I first saw it, it was on Amazon Prime. I wouldn't be surprised if it's there again or returns shortly thereafter. But if you've got a couple extra bucks and you want to rent it, it's well worth the time, well worth the money. I guarantee you, you have not seen. Because I mean, let's face it, there are so many movies out there that just feel like they're cookie cuttered off an assembly line that you've just seen the same movie but with different set decorations and different actors. This is a movie that you've not seen before.
Yeah. I don't know if it's still on Prime, but it's definitely on Hulu right now. So if you have Hulu, give it a watch. I would say that, I don't know, it could be a triggering movie for somebody that's had to deal with suicide or had suicidal thoughts. I guess that could be a trigger for you. So, I mean,
Yeah, I think that's fair. But on the other hand, with a title like Wristcutters,
you know what you're getting
I
into.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't shy away from that whatsoever. So,
hmm and if anything, I'd say that the title has helped the movie age a little bit better than it would have otherwise.
you think so?
Well, yeah, because you know what the movie is. They aren't being, it's not selling one thing and then delivering another.
Yeah, that's fair. So it sounds
So
like we would both recommend this movie, right?
I think it's one of those occasions where we both are very at least enthusiastic about the movie.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of the better movies that we've covered on this show.
It is, yeah. So thanks, Doc.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. Tell people where they can find you on this worldwide web of hers.
Well, when I feel like uploading an episode, you can find me and my best buddy Jake on a little show called Jake and Tom Conquer the World. We talk about everything from superheroes, movies, television shows, to the misadventures of Jake's little day drinking hobby. If you want to find us, you can find us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or whatever the hell they're calling it, Amazon, Spotify. And you can also reach out to us on Twitter at The Drunken Dork and on Facebook at Jake and Tom Conquer the Group. Randy, what about you? Where can they find you?
In the corner crying because I thought I was your best bud, damn it.
You're my best pal.
Oh, perfect.
It's one of those separate but equal things.
Yay. You can find me on Twitter at mretailslave or on a big dumb comedy show called Miserable Retail Slave. And this week, Tommy and I were on the Bumwine Bob podcast, Bumming with Bob. It was a good time. We were there with Dennis from the Dennis Show, who we had on Miserable Retail Slave last episode, and with Shayna from the Girl Interrupted podcast. It got pretty wild, to say the least. Hopefully, you'll listen and have a great time. I had fun doing it, so check it out. You should hit up. Have you ever been hooked up with Bob before?
I have not. I've interacted with him a couple times on Twitter. He seems like a really good guy.
Absolutely. He's one of my favorite new people that I've met this year. I've known him for years, same as you, but just never had a conversation with him. He's a good dude. That's a good podcast. He does great things, so check that out. And
absolutely.
Also, check us out next week because Tomko, God damn it, we're in the heat of the summer, and I said we were going to do this. we're covering movies that are summer related. And next week, it's the movie called Surf 2.
I feel like I'm giving penance for some sin against you, Randy.
I mean, we're going back to our roots and really covering some obscure content.
We aren't doing movies that are always going to be this good, folks.
Oh, you haven't even seen Surf 2. You don't know. How dare you, sir?
You don't know me.
You don't know me. You don't know my struggles. You don't know my Surf 2. Oh,
I'm looking forward to it. I will approach it with an open mind, okay?
Okay. After that, we're covering Cruel Jaws, which is also
I you know what? That's a way better title than Surf 2.
I would agree with that. Cruel Jaws is like Jaws, but more cruel. So, you know.
Yeah.
And after that, it'll be a surprise. How about that?
Fair enough.
Tell all your friends to listen if you've got big, dumb movie geeks in your lives who love cult classics and B movies. Send them our way. We could use any support. Thank you for listening.
More importantly, send us your suggestions. We're always looking for new movies.
Absolutely. We've had a few listener requests over the past few weeks. We did The Skeleton Key and Hard Candy. We did Fade to Black. We took your votes for what franchise you wanted us to cover, so we covered the entirety of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre spread over 2 episodes, like almost 4 hours, 3.5 hours of content there. So
pretty close, yeah.
Yeah. So drop us a line at someone's favorite movie podcast at gmail.com if you have suggestions for us, or hit one of us up on Twitter, and we will gladly take a look at what you have to offer. Okay? Okay.
See ya.
Oh, I have a sign-off line now that I thought of.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Tomko.
I am waiting with bated breath.
Tomko, we're no movie critics, but I feel like Wristcutters has been sufficiently criticized. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Did that work?
That'll work.
Okay. Bye.